Chapter 2 The Longer Walk Home. I'm so excited about this lesson, Alex told Connor as they walked home from school. This was something Connor was used to hearing his sister declare, and it was usually his cue to stop listening. Mrs. Peters made a very good point, Alex continued excitedly, speaking a mile a minute. Think about everything children miss out on when they're deprived of fairy tales. Oh, how terrible for them. Don't you just feel awful? Connor, are you listening to me? Yep, Connor lied. His attention was focused on an abandoned snail shell he was kicking along the sidewalk. Can you imagine a childhood without knowing all those characters and places? Alex continued. We are so fortunate that Dad and Grandma made such a point of reading them to us when we were little. Very lucky, Connor nodded, although he wasn't exactly sure what he was agreeing with. Every day after school, the Bailey twins would walk home together. They lived in a charming neighborhood that was surrounded by more charming neighborhoods. It was a sea of suburbia where each house was similar to the next but uniquely different at the same time. To pass the time as they walked, Alex would tell her brother everything on her mind. All her current thoughts and concerns, a summary of everything she had learned that day, and what she planned to do as soon as they got home. As much as his daily routine annoyed Connor, he knew he was the only person in the world Alex had to talk to, so he tried his best to listen. But listening had never been Connor's forte. How am I ever going to decide which story to write about? It's too difficult to choose, Alex said, clapping her hands with excitement. Which one are you going to write your paper on? Connor said, whipping his head up from looking at the ground. He had to mentally rewind the conversation to remember what the question was. The boy who cried wolf, he said, choosing the first fairy tale that came to mind. You can't choose that one, Alex said, shaking her head. That's the most obvious one. You have to select something more challenging to impress Mrs. Peters. You should pick something with a message hidden deeper inside it, one that isn't so on the surface. Connor sighed. It was always easier to just go along with Alex instead of arguing with her, but sometimes it was unavoidable. Fine, I'll pick Sleeping Beauty, he decided. Interesting selection, Alex said, intrigued. What do you suppose the moral of the story is? Don't piss off your neighbors, I guess, Connor said. Alex grunted disapprovingly. Be serious, Connor. That is not the moral of Sleeping Beauty, she reprimanded. Sure it is, Connor explained. If the king and queen had just invited that crazy enchantress to the daughter's party in the first place, none of that stuff ever would have happened. They couldn't have stopped it from happening, said Alex. That enchantress was evil and probably would have cursed the baby princess anyway. Her parents tried protecting her, and all the spinning wheels in the kingdom destroyed. She was so sheltered she didn't even know what danger was, and she still pricked her finger on the first spindle she ever saw. Connor thought about this possibility and shook his head. He liked his version much better. I disagree, Connor told her. I've seen how upset you get when people don't invite you to places, and you usually look like you would curse the baby too. Alex gave Connor a dirty look Mrs. Peters would have been proud of. Well, there's no such thing as wrong interpretation. I have to say that is definitely a misread, Alex said. I'm just saying to be careful who you ignore, Connor clarified. I always thought Sleeping Beauty's parents had it coming. Oh, Alex questioned him. And I suppose you thought Hansel and Gretel had it coming too? Yes, Connor said, feeling clever. And so did the witch. How so? Alex asked. Because, Connor explained with a smirk on his face, if you're going to live in a house made of candy, don't move next door to a couple of obese kids. A lot of these fairy tale characters are missing common sense. Alex let out another disapproving grunt. Connor figured he could get at least 50 more out of her before they got home. The witch didn't live next door. She lived deep in the forest. They had to leave a trail of breadcrumbs behind so they could find their way back, remember? And the whole point of the house was to lure the kids in. They were starving, Alex reminded him. At least have all the facts straight before you criticize. If they were starving, what were they doing wasting breadcrumbs? Connor asked. Sounds like a couple of troublemakers to me. Alex grunted again. And in your deranged mind, what do you think the lesson of Goldilocks and the Three Bears is? Alex challenged him. Easy, Connor said. Lock your doors. Robbers come in all shapes and sizes. Even curly-haired little girls can't be trusted. Alex grunted again and crossed her arms. She tried her best not to giggle. She didn't want to validate her brother's opinion. Goldilocks is about consequences. Mrs. Peters said so herself, Alex said. Although Alex would never admit it, sometimes arguing with her brother was amusing. What do you suppose Jack and the Beanstalk is about? She asked. Connor contemplated a moment and slyly grinned. Bad beans can cause more than indigestion, he answered, laughing hysterically to himself. Alex pursed her lips to hide a smile. What do you think the lesson of Little Red Riding Hood is? She asked him. Do you think she should have just mailed her grandmother this gift basket? Now you're thinking, he said. Although I've always felt sorry for Little Red Riding Hood, it's obvious her parents didn't like her very much. Why do you say that? Alex asked, wondering how he could have possibly constructed that from the story. Who sends their young daughter into a dark and wolf-occupied forest carrying freshly baked food and wearing a bright jacket? Connor asked. They were practically asking for a wolf to eat her. She must have annoyed the heck out of them. Alex held back laughter with all her might, but to Connor's delight, she let a quick chuckle slip. I know you secretly agree with me, Connor said, bumping her shoulder with his. Connor, it's people like you who ruin fairy tales for the rest of the world, Alex said, forcing the smile on her face to fade. People make jokes about them, and suddenly the whole message, it's lost. Alex suddenly stopped walking. All the color in her face slowly drained away. Something across the street had caught her eye, something very disappointing. What's the matter? Connor asked, turning back to her. Alex was staring at a large house. It was a lovely home, painted blue with white trim and several windows. The front yard was landscaped to perfection. It had just the right amount of grass, patches of colorful flowers, and a large oak tree, ideal for climbing. If the house could smile, this house would be grinning from ear to ear. Look, Alex said, and pointed to a for sale sign next to the oak tree. A bright red strip from the word sold had recently been added to it. It's sold, Alex said, slowly shaking her head from side to side in disbelief. It's sold, she repeated, not wanting it to be true. The little color in Connor's round face drained too. The twins stared at the house for a moment in silence, each not knowing what to say to the other. We both knew it would happen eventually, Connor said. Then why do I feel so surprised? Alex asked softly. I guess it has been for sale for so long. I figured it was just, waiting for us. Connor saw tears begin to form in his sister's eyes, through the tears forming in his own. Come on, Alex, Connor said and kept walking. Let's go home. She looked at the house for a second more and then followed him. This house was only one thing the Bailey family had recently lost.